My name is Peter, and this story is about how I lost my house, my business, and the life I thought I had secured for myself and my son. Not overnight. Not in a moment of madness. But slowly, carefully, step by step, while believing I was doing the right thing. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't desperate. I was tired, responsible, and convinced that helping another person was a sign of strength. That belief cost me everything. I didn't meet her through friends or dating apps. I met her through my own company, during a normal workday that looked exactly like every other day before it. At that time, I ran a small construction materials business. Insulation, concrete mixes, drywall. Honest, boring work. The kind of business where margins are thin and pressure is constant. I had employees, contracts, and a warehouse that never seemed to sleep. I also had a boss above me, a regional supervisor who measured success only in numbers and deadlines. When he told me I needed help, he didn't say it kindly. He said I was replaceable if I couldn't keep up. That was the moment everything started to shift. Not with fear, but with compliance. Because when a man is exhausted, he doesn't look for danger. He looks for relief. And Relief walked into my office wearing a polite smile and speaking with a soft Ukrainian accent. Her name was Ekaterina. She was introduced to me by my boss's secretary, who spoke quickly and avoided eye contact while explaining that Ekaterina needed work urgently. No documents. No official contract. Cash payments. Temporary, the secretary said, as if that word protected everyone involved. Ekaterina stood quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered, listening as if she were afraid to interrupt the air itself. She told me she had come from Ukraine, that she had children, that she didn't complain and didn't ask questions. My boss watched her closely and nodded with approval. She'll work, he said. People like her always do. I should have heard the warning hidden inside that sentence, but I didn't. I saw an opportunity to stabilize my workload and help someone survive at the same time. Ekaterina learned everything fast. Phones, invoices, suppliers, schedules. She arrived before everyone and left after everyone. She thanked me constantly, quietly, in a way that made me feel useful. During breaks, she told small pieces of her story. Never dramatic. Never emotional. Just enough to explain why she was grateful. My dog didn't like her. From the first day she stepped into my house, he stiffened, growled, refused to approach her. I joked about it. Dogs sense strangers, I said. I didn't realize he sensed something I refused to acknowledge. Ekaterina became indispensable faster than I expected. Within weeks she knew suppliers better than some of my paid staff, remembered prices, delivery schedules, client habits. She never raised her voice, never argued, never challenged authority. When mistakes happened, she took responsibility even if they weren't hers. My boss noticed. He started praising her openly, calling her reliable, grateful, the kind of worker you don't find anymore. The secretary stopped looking uneasy and started smiling at Ekaterina like they shared something I wasn't part of. I told myself this was good. Stability. Order. Relief. Slowly, conversations changed. Ekaterina stopped talking only about work and began sharing personal details. Not complaints, just facts. She couldn't rent legally. She moved often. Her children were staying with friends. She said these things calmly, never asking for help directly, letting silence do the work. One evening she asked if she could store some boxes at my place temporarily. Then a suitcase. Then another. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice when she was no longer a guest in my house, but a presence. She cooked meals without asking. Cleaned without being told. Spoke softly, respectfully, always using my name. My dog reacted worse every day. Barking when she entered rooms. Standing between us. Refusing food she touched. I corrected him. Told him to behave. I was training myself to ignore warnings. My son Luke visited on weekends. Ekaterina treated him gently, asked about school, listened attentively. Luke once asked why she looked at papers with our address on them. I told him adults handle complicated things. That answer would haunt me later. The first paper I signed didn't feel dangerous. It was framed as protection. Ekaterina said it was a power of attorney, something simple, something practical. If something happens to you, she explained, voice steady, eyes sincere, your business, your house, everything will be safe. For Luke. She cried when she said his name. I didn't ask a lawyer. I didn't slow down. My boss supported it. You need backup, he said. She's loyal. She won't betray you. That word again. Loyal. The second paper came weeks later. Something about property restructuring. Taxes. Optimization. She said people like her had learned to survive by planning ahead. I signed because it felt responsible. Because refusing would have meant doubting her intentions. Doubt would have made me the bad person. Ekaterina's children moved in quietly, without announcement. Suddenly the house was full. She rearranged furniture. Put up pictures. Referred to rooms as ours. The bank letters started arriving with her name alongside mine. Luke noticed before I did. Why is her name everywhere? He asked. I snapped at him, sharper than I meant to. My dog growled constantly now. Loud, deep, relentless. Ekaterina asked me once if I could consider rehoming him. Said he made her nervous. I refused. That refusal would be the last boundary I enforced. Everything else had already begun slipping away. The shift didn't happen suddenly. That's what makes it hard to explain to people later. Ekaterina didn't change her behavior overnight. She didn't become aggressive or rude. She became confident. Decisions were made without consulting me. Bills were paid before I saw them. Calls were answered in my name. When I asked questions, she answered calmly, as if I were the one catching up. You told me to handle this, she would say. I thought you trusted me. Trust. That word had become a tool. My boss stopped coming by the warehouse. His secretary stopped replying to emails. Everything was filtered through Ekaterina. I told myself this was delegation. Leadership. Growth. One afternoon I came home and noticed the house felt different. Quieter. Controlled. My dog stayed close to me, tense, watching her movements. Ekaterina mentioned casually that she had spoken to a lawyer about residency options for her children. We need stability, she said. Children need roots. She said this while standing in my kitchen, holding a cup she had bought, in a house that still had my name on the door. Luke called me later that night, confused. Why does she tell me what I'm allowed to do here? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. I told him she was stressed. That she meant well. That adults sometimes act strange under pressure. I was explaining away the last fragments of my authority while believing I was protecting peace. The day everything ended started like any other. I came home late, tired, thinking about inventory shortages and unpaid invoices. My key didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. I stepped back, confused, and that's when Ekaterina opened the door. She didn't look angry. She didn't look afraid. She looked prepared. We need to talk, she said, and her voice was flat, professional. She handed me a folder. Inside were documents I had signed, now arranged in a way I had never seen before. Ownership transfer. Custody considerations. Eviction notice. She explained calmly that the house was legally hers now, that staying would be trespassing, that she had already informed the authorities to avoid conflict. I laughed. I actually laughed, because my brain refused to accept the words. Then she asked me to leave. My dog barked from behind her legs, frantic. I asked about Luke. She said he would be safer away from instability. That was the word she used. I stepped outside with nothing but my phone and wallet. The door closed. The lock clicked. The sound was final. I stood there longer than I can admit, staring at a house I no longer owned, realizing that every step I had taken to be kind, responsible, and understanding had been documented, weaponized, and turned against me. I spent that night in my truck, parked 2 streets away from the house, watching the lights go on and off through the windshield. I kept expecting someone to come outside and say there had been a mistake, that this was all a misunderstanding, that we would talk in the morning. No one came. When I finally drove away, it wasn't out of anger. It was out of shame. The police were polite when I called them. That politeness cut deeper than hostility would have. They explained that everything looked legal, that the signatures matched, that disputes like this were civil matters. The bank said the same. So did the lawyer I couldn't afford. Each conversation ended with the same quiet conclusion: I had agreed to all of it. My boss didn't return my calls. His secretary sent a single message saying the company needed to distance itself from personal matters. Suppliers began demanding payments. Accounts were frozen. Contracts were cancelled. Without access to the warehouse and paperwork, the business stalled within weeks. Luke stayed with his mother longer than planned. He stopped asking when we would go home. That silence felt heavier than any accusation. I tried to visit the house once, just to see my dog. Ekaterina had installed cameras. A warning sign was posted near the door. I turned around without knocking. For the first time, I understood that nothing about this was emotional anymore. It was procedural. Efficient. Clean. And I had helped build every step of it. Losing the company hurt in a different way than losing the house. The house was personal. The business was identity. I had built it over years of early mornings and late nights, mistakes and recoveries. Watching it dissolve was like watching a structure collapse in slow motion while being told it was structurally sound. Employees left quietly. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered sympathy they didn't know how to phrase. I sold equipment to cover debts. Then sold more to survive. Ekaterina never contacted me again. Not once. No message. No explanation. No apology. That silence was intentional. It erased the illusion that there had ever been a relationship to resolve. I learned later, through a former co-worker, that my boss and his secretary had known about similar situations in other cities. Different names. Same pattern. A woman introduced quietly. No paperwork. Gradual control. Legal transfer. Clean exit. There was nothing illegal if you followed the steps carefully enough. That knowledge didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't uniquely foolish. I had been selected. I had fit the profile perfectly. Responsible. Tired. Willing to help. Believing that kindness, when documented, would be honored. Instead, it had been archived and used. By the time I understood that, there was nothing left to contest but my own assumptions about how people behave when given power. I didn't go looking for answers right away. 4 weeks I moved through days mechanically, doing what needed to be done to survive. Temporary work. Borrowed couches. Long walks at night just to stay tired enough to sleep. The need to understand came later, quietly, when the shock wore off and left space for questions. I started with public records, not because I expected miracles, but because facts felt safer than memories. That's when patterns began to emerge. Different last names. Different addresses. Same age range. Same timeline. Properties transferred shortly after cohabitation. Businesses dissolved within months. I found a case in another state that read like a distorted mirror of my own life. The same story of trust, urgency, and paperwork disguised as protection. I contacted the lawyer listed in that case. He remembered her. Not with anger. With fatigue. She's careful, he said. She doesn't break laws. She uses them. That sentence reframed everything. I wasn't dealing with chaos. I had been inside a method. The boss's secretary finally returned one call. She didn't apologize. She warned me to stop digging. Said it would only hurt me more. That warning confirmed what silence had already told me. This wasn't an accident. It was a corridor, and I had walked its length willingly. Understanding that didn't restore what I lost, but it stopped me from imagining alternate endings where I could have talked my way out. There had never been a conversation to win. Only a structure to exit. The hardest conversation wasn't with a lawyer or a banker. It was with Luke. We sat in his room, surrounded by things that had survived the transition because they fit in a suitcase. He didn't ask dramatic questions. He asked practical ones. Where would the dog go? Why adults could take things so easily? Why being nice didn't protect us? I answered carefully, without turning him into a witness or a judge. I told him that trust must be earned continuously, not granted once and defended forever. That paperwork matters. That discomfort is information. He listened quietly, older than his age in that moment. When he asked if I would ever get angry, I told him anger wasn't the problem. Silence was. Not speaking up. Not slowing down. Not asking for help when something feels off because pride tells you to handle it alone. That night, after he fell asleep, I realized how much of this story was about isolation. How being the responsible one had cut me off from correction. I had believed strength meant absorbing pressure quietly. What it actually did was make me predictable. Easy to manage. That realization hurt more than the loss of property. Because it meant the collapse wasn't just about Ekaterina. It was about a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. Recovery didn't arrive as a breakthrough. It arrived as routine. Early mornings. Temporary jobs. Forms. Waiting rooms. I learned quickly that rebuilding isn't inspiring, it's repetitive. I took hourly work wherever it appeared, unloading trucks, checking inventory for companies that didn't know my name and didn't need my story. That anonymity helped. It stripped away the urge to explain. I stopped chasing justice and started chasing stability. I opened a new bank account with limits I couldn't exceed. I rented a small place close to Luke's school. I adopted another dog from a shelter, older, calm, observant. He slept near the door and watched everything. I began to notice how my body reacted to situations now. Tightness when something felt rushed. Fatigue when someone spoke in circles. Relief when details were concrete. These reactions had always been there, I just hadn't listened. I met with a counselor once a week, not to relive the story, but to map the moments where I had overridden my own resistance. The pattern was clear. Whenever compassion conflicted with clarity, I chose compassion. Whenever urgency replaced verification, I complied. I had equated kindness with agreement. That confusion had cost me years. Naming it didn't erase the damage, but it prevented repetition. That was progress. Quiet, measurable, unromantic progress. And for the first time since the lock clicked behind me, I felt like I was moving forward without chasing anyone else's approval. Accepting responsibility was the last and most uncomfortable step. Not legal responsibility. Emotional responsibility. It would have been easier to frame myself purely as a victim, to place every consequence at Ekaterina's feet and close the case. But that story wouldn't have been true. I had made choices. I had ignored signals. I had preferred harmony over scrutiny. That didn't make me evil or foolish. It made me human. But humans who don't examine their patterns repeat them. I wrote down every decision point where I could have paused. The first time my dog growled. The first time Luke questioned paperwork. The first time my boss pushed me to move faster than I was comfortable. I didn't do this to punish myself. I did it to learn where my boundaries had dissolved. Accountability, I realized, isn't about blame. It's about agency. If I could own my part without self-contempt, I could also reclaim control without fear. That reframing changed how I approached everything afterward. Contracts were reviewed. Conversations were slowed. Help was accepted earlier. Silence was treated as a signal, not a challenge. I stopped measuring myself by how much I could carry alone. Strength, I learned, isn't endurance without limits. It's discernment with boundaries. And that lesson, earned painfully, became the foundation for whatever came next. Months later, when the immediate damage had settled into something resembling routine, I received a message I didn't expect. It wasn't from Ekaterina. It was from someone who had known her under a different name. A woman who had reached out quietly, carefully, as if afraid of being overheard. She had found my contact through public records and wanted to confirm something before speaking further. She told me she had worked in a different company years earlier, in another state, and that Ekaterina had arrived there the same way she arrived in my life. Introduced through management. Hired unofficially. Integrated quickly. Trusted completely. The details were disturbingly familiar. A house. A business. Children added to documents. A calm eviction. No shouting. No police reports that went anywhere. When I asked why she was telling me now, she said she was finally ready to admit she had helped look the other way. That sentence closed something inside me. Not because it offered revenge, but because it erased doubt. There was no alternate version of events where I could have reasoned my way out. The system worked because it relied on decency. On men who wanted to be fair. On silence. I thanked her and deleted the message afterward. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed proof to move forward. The truth had already done its work. The idea of justice changes when you've been stripped quietly. At first, I imagined confrontation, exposure, consequences that would balance the scales. Over time, that desire faded. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because it no longer defined me. I rebuilt my life in smaller terms. A stable schedule. Clear agreements. Evenings with Luke that weren't interrupted by phone calls or emergencies that weren't mine. My new dog slept peacefully. I slept better too. I stopped rehearsing arguments that would never happen. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't need to understand. When friends asked what I had learned, I didn't give speeches. I said one thing. Nothing that matters should require you to disappear. That was the quiet truth beneath everything. I had faded from my own life in the name of being helpful, reliable, strong. When that role was no longer needed, I was removed. Resolution didn't come from restoring what I lost. It came from recognizing what I had abandoned before anything was taken. My attention. My hesitation. My right to say no without justification. Regaining those wasn't dramatic. It was steady. And for the first time in years, steady felt enough. If there is a lesson in this story, it isn't about immigrants, or women, or business. It's about boundaries and how easily they dissolve when responsibility replaces awareness. Manipulation doesn't always arrive as pressure. Sometimes it arrives as relief. As help. As someone willing to take things off your plate. Every time you accept that help without clarity, you trade control for comfort. I did it repeatedly, believing that trust once given should be defended. That belief was wrong. Trust isn't a gift. It's a process. It needs confirmation. It needs friction. It needs the ability to survive questions. If it can't, it isn't trust. It's compliance. The signs were there. My dog reacted. My son questioned. My body resisted. I explained all of it away because stopping would have meant facing uncertainty. And uncertainty felt more dangerous than silence. Now I know better. Silence is never neutral. It either protects you or erodes you. The difference lies in whether you're using it intentionally or letting it be used against you. I don't regret being kind. I regret confusing kindness with surrender. I tell this story because someone is standing at the edge of the same corridor I walk through. They are tired. They are responsible. They believe doing the right thing means moving faster than they should. If that's you, pause. Not forever. Just long enough to listen to resistance instead of explaining it away. Nothing in your life should require secrecy to function. Nothing that matters should depend on urgency to survive. I lost a house. I lost a company. But I didn't lose my son, and I didn't lose the ability to rebuild with intention. That matters more than property. If you take one thing from this, let it be simple. Help does not require ownership. Compassion does not require paperwork. And trust that demands silence is not trust at all. Walk away before the lock clicks. That isn't weakness. That is awareness.